7A.
Good morning. I'm
Towards the
still
top.
eating breakfast, so I'm going to keep my video off for a little while.
Okay. So I believe we're at 57A, about 8 lines down at the colon. So the Mishnah was discussing things that are not valid to affect the marriage with, because they have no value in that you're forbidden to get any benefit from them. One of them was Eglah Rufa. Eglah Rufa is the ritual of, if a dead body is found outside of a town and it's not known who the perpetrator was of a murder, then the elders of the town, of the nearest town, would engage in this ritual in which they broke the neck of a calf in a wadi nearby, and declared that they were not responsible, and this was some kind of a kapara for them. So that calf was forbidden to get any hana from, to get any benefit from. Therefore, it has no value. So Begla Rufa, the Mishnah said, if someone uses this calf to affect the Kiddushin, a marriage, then it's not valid. Doesn't work. Minalad. How do you know that you can't benefit from the Eglah Rufa? Amrei Dvei Rabbi Yanai. In the yeshiva of Rabbi Yanai, they said kapara ksiva kikachim. The word kapara is used. Kapara is atonement, right? Kaper lamcha Yisrael. Part of the ritual was to state, atone for your nation Israel, and atonement is also the matter that's discussed when it comes to korbanot, to sacrifices. And we know, of course, that korbanot, they belong to God, as it were, and you can't have any personal benefit from them. Therefore, by this use of the word kapara, we also understand the same thing about the Eglah Rufa. Okay, the Gemara leaves it at that. It's very simple. Sipari Matzara. What about the birds of a Mitzara? So a Mitzara is someone who suffers from the skin ailment. As specified in the Torah, he has to go to the Kohen, and it has to be cured, and then there's a ritual for him to become. He's actually has to leave the camp. He's has to, in the desert. Of course, it was the encampment of the people, but in contemporary, or in later terms, it became he had to leave the temple and the city of Jerusalem. And when his disease cleared up, part of the ritual was to offer these two birds. One was a sacrifice, and the other was dipped in its blood and then sent free. So you can't use these birds to affect the marriage. Minon, where do you get that idea from? The Tana Rabbi Shmuel, they taught by Rabbi Shmuel, Nemar machshir u'mechaper b'mitzvim, and Nemar machshir u'mechaper mibachutz. These two types of rituals, which we're referring to as machshir, that allow, it's not an atonement from a sin, but it's something that allows a previously forbidden thing to be done. So in the case of the Mitzora, where he previously was not able to come into the camp to eat from kashim, from sacrifices, etc. The part of what this ritual did was to permit him to do that. But there's no element of that's a separate element of kapara, of atonement. Now there's also an atonement. So what the Gemara is saying is that just as the Mitzora has both of these elements, so too does an Eglah Rufa. I think it's compared to the Eglah Rufa, has both of these elements as well. And ma machshir mechaper b'fnim also bo machshir kimechaper, just as in the case of not Eglah Rufa, but in sacrifices in general, when you have other instances of cases where there is both a atonement and a machshir, or something that allows you to do things that you were previously forbidden from, and both of them are are equated. There's like no distinction in the rules of how you bring like an asham. So an example is an asham of someone who steals, right, or who brings false testimony or something like that. So um, there's no distinction made between these different types of sacrifices. So too with the mitzvah, we're not going to distinguish between the two birds, one which is given as a sacrifice and the other is just part of a ritual that allows the mitzvah to continue to resume his normal life. And so we're equating them in the sense that also in the sense that you can't benefit from either of the birds. Just as obviously you can't benefit from the bird that is a sacrifice, you can't benefit from the bird that is set free. So now we're going to discuss a little further the details of these two birds. Itmar, Tipari Masar Me'emas Aisurim. When do these two birds become forbidden for use? Rabbi Yochanan Amar Mishas Shchita, from the time that you slaughter one of them for the korban. Reish Lakish Amar Mishas Lakicha. Reish Lakish says no, from the time that you set them aside, that these are going to be my birds for the Mitzvah ritual. That's when they become Asur B'Hana. That's when they become forbidden for personal use. Now, what's the reason? Rabbi Yochanan Mishas Shchita, Rabbi Yochanan, who says it's from the time that you slaughter the one for the korban. Shchita hu da'asra. What makes that bird forbidden? Like that, there's no reason to think that bird is forbidden before the sacrificial ritual is started. And how do you start that ritual? With the shchita, with the slaughtering, and therefore that is when he thinks that the other bird that is set free also becomes usher. When it becomes kodesh, or when it becomes when it becomes a sacrifice, is when you would do the shechita. Reish Lakish Amar Mishas Lakicha, but Reish Lakish says no, it's from the time that you set them aside for this purpose. Me'agla rufa nafka. We're going to derive this from agla rufa. When does that become asur b'hana? Ma'agla rufa mechaim. Just as the agla rufa, even while it's still alive, before the ritual is done, before its neck is broken, it's already been forbidden to you for personal use. The same thing with the birds of the mitzvah. So, where do you get that from in the first place? How do you know? Like, let's back up a step. When does the agla rufa become forbidden? I once heard the border, the dividing line. Like when does it cease to be permitted for use and become forbidden for use? But I forgot. I forgot when it was. The Nasrin Chavai Lomar. So my friends got together in yeshiva and they said, "You know what? I'll tell you when it is. When it is led down into the wadi that where the shechita is performed. So, in other words, that's the beginning of the ritual, even though you haven't killed it yet. That's when it becomes asur b'hana. So Gemara says, "Imam egla rufa mishas lakicha lamitzara afsipar mitzari nami mishas lakicha lamitzara." Okay, so you want to derive the birds of the mitzara from the egla rufa. Well, you're saying that there's three steps in the egla rufa. You designate the calf, right? You take it down to the wadi and you break its neck, right? Now you want to apply that to the birds of the mitzara. Well, you're applying it to the first stage, to the designating of them. Why don't you apply? What you should be doing is applying the second stage of the egla rufa, which is when you take it down into the valley. So Gemara says, well, how can you say that? In the case of the egla rufa, there are three things, right? There's three steps, and here in the case of the birds of the Tzara, there's only two steps. So if you're going to apply 3 to 2, you should choose. That's why we choose the first step. There's no other step in the when it comes to the birds. So Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. So Rabbi Yochanan, who says it's from the time that you do the shechita of the birds, of the first bird, that's when they become forbidden. He asks Reish Lakish, Kol tzipar tahara tachelu. The Torah says you can eat any tahor bird, right? In the terms of being kosher, right? What kinds of bird can you eat? Any kosher bird, and then it continues to list the non-kosher bird. L'rabos says hamishulachas. When it says every bird, these are all the kosher birds you can eat. That includes the bird that you set free of the mitzvah. And then this is the birds that you should not eat. L'rabos says ashkuta. That includes the 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 one that's slaughtered. Um, that's what you cannot eat, right? The that's included in those that you which ones you cannot eat. So the same. So this is a question on Reish Lakish, right? Because this Brisa clearly states that the bird that you set free is the bird that you set free is 1 second. So if the Torah is like going out of its way to tell us this, right? We already know from Eglah Rufa that, or from how we derived before, that the bird that you set free is forbidden. So this must be telling you that it's forbidden at an earlier stage, since we're going. So Reish Lakish, why do you say that it's still permitted, or that it's still permitted until a later stage? So Mao is saying because the answer is because you might have said mididava kachim. It should be, you would think it's like other kachim, other sacrifices. When does when what happens to a regular carbon? You can't. So let's say a carbon that you can partake of, like a shlamim. So until the shlita has been done, until the sacrificial service has been done, you can't use it for your own benefit. Once it's been slaughtered, then the parts that you can eat, you can then eat. So shchita makes it okay. So kamash malan. So I would think maybe the same here applies to the birds. So this price tells you it's not the case. Esve, so Rioch asks another question. If you slaughter this bird, the one of the birds from the Mitzvah, and it turns out that it wasn't a kosher bird, right? It was that now the Gemara is assuming that you had messed up the shechita. You didn't do it properly, and so it became a treifa. It's not valid anymore. Yikach dugla shniya. So keep the second bird that you were going to send away. Keep that one and find another one to pair with it to do the shechita on properly. And the first one that you messed up, you can't eat it. You can't use it for the mitzvah ritual, but you can use it for whatever you can whatever benefit you can get from a dead bird. You can use it. Now, if you think that it's already forbidden, from the time that you designate it and before the shechita, rishana my mutar spana. So how did it become mutar? How did it become okay to use? It should be forbidden because it was already designated. So you can answer, what are we talking about? No, you thought we were talking about where you messed up the shechita. No, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about you did the shechita, and then you examined the internal organs of the bird, and you found out, what? This bird had a fatal disease. Okay, and that is something that makes it treifa. So in other words, at the time that you designated it, it was already no good, right? You just discovered it now, but it was never properly designated. You thought you designated it, but it turned out to be an invalid one. Therefore, that's why you can still use it, because it was never real. You've discovered that it was never really a candidate for this, for being part of the mitzvah ritual. It was never able to attain that status of kachim. Another question. So part of the mitzvah ritual I didn't mention before. There's a whole thing similar to paraduma. You mix some ashes and some water and a red thread. Not ashes, sorry. There's a cedar and some kind of herb. So let's say you did the shechita without having prepared that stuff before. Since the bird was designated for the mitzvah, even though it was not done properly, it's still asur b'na. Reb Shimon says, no, it was slaughtered incorrectly. It's not really, you haven't really done anything of the ritual properly, so it's not considered kachim at all. It's permitted to you. So the question is obvious. Um, if it was if you say that it's from the time that you designate it, right? So what does it matter if you did the shechita properly or not? Once you designated it, it's usher, right? You did the shechita improperly, that's too bad, but it still should be usher, right? It's not like there wasn't a proper designation, right? So this seems to indicate that that's not the case. That it's the shechita that makes it forbidden for hana. So the Gemara answer. So yeah, the Gemara still explaining the question. Adkan l'pligei Omar savar shchita shenu ruya shma shchita umar savar shchita shenu ruya lo shma shchita. Um, so what are they arguing about? Whether the shchita is valid. Chuli alma miya mechaim lo mitzvah. In fact, the Gemara says both of them seem to agree that it's permitted until the shchita. The question is only about the shchita itself, whether it's a good shchita or not. But either way, it looks like it's the designation. It's the shechita, not the designation. So more answers Tanaihi. So you know what? You're right. There is a machlokas Tanaim about this. So all of the sources we saw, or all the questions we saw, would accord with one source, but there is a Tana source that indicates, like Reish Lakish says, Mishas Lakicha, from the time you designated it. And where's that source? The Tana is very Shmuel. They taught in the Yeshiva of Shmuel. Never machshir mechaper b'fnim and never machshir mechaper b'chutz. The Torah talks about things done with karbanos that are both machshir, as we said before, machshir and mechaper, that are that permit you to do something, and there are some things that atone for sins. And there are also things that are done like that outside of the mikdash. Ma machshir mechaper hama b'fnim asavo machshir k'mechaper, just as in the temple, those sacrifices are treated exactly the same. There's no difference. So you treat the outside things, such as the Mitzvah ritual or the Eglah Rufa, you treat them equally. And so if that's the case, just as the Eglah Rufa is forbidden while still alive, the birds are forbidden while still alive as well. In other words, from the time that they're designated. So that's the source that supports Reish Lakish. Gufa. So we said in this brisa called Tzipor Torah Tochelet. Earlier we said referred to any kosher bird. These are the kosher birds that you can eat. The Rambam says on Mishulachas that by saying all of these birds, it includes the bird that you set free as part of the Mitzvah thing. And when it says, and this is which you should not eat from them, of the birds, these are the not kosher birds. It includes an extra word, asher, I think is the extra word here. So what does that include? That you can't eat the one that is, you can't have a benefit from the one that is slaughtered in the Mitzvah ritual. The Gemara says, why do you have to read it that way? You could read it the other way. How do you know which one to include and which one to exclude? Right? Because you don't generally find live animals that are forbidden for use, right? So if you're gonna follow the pattern, if you're gonna forbid an animal, you're gonna forbid the one that was slaughtered, right? Not the one that remains alive. Maski flower Shmuel by Yitzchak, so Shmuel Yitzchak, oh, really? Why not? Hooray, Muksa. The Neva, the Bali Chaim Vasiri, what about an animal that was designated for idol worship and used for idol worship? Isn't it the case? And it's still alive. Isn't that the case that you can't use that? You can't get benefit from that animal. So you do have an example of animals, alive animals that you can't benefit from. Whereas no, it's not that you can't have any benefit from that animal. It's that you can't use that animal as a sacrifice. And in Mikdash Lahedya Mishra Shari, but for a regular person, you could still use that animal. Maskav or Virmias or Rovev and Yerba Baidim. What about an animal that was used in a act of bestiality? So that animal is not forbidden, they're not permitted for use, and it's still alive. It's still, although what you actually have to stone that animal and execute it, but while it's still alive, it's already forbidden for use. So you have here's an example of a live animal that is forbidden. So the question returns, why do you, when you choose from the kosher bird chapter, which of the Mitzvah birds to include as being forbidden and which to exclude, or whatever, include or exclude, which one is forbidden and which one is permitted? Like, why do you choose the way you choose? That you choose the one that's slaughtered to be forbidden and the one that's freed to be not forbidden, to be permitted. We'll have another theory of why we choose that way. It's like in most cases, right? So, all right, fine, you found an exception. I'll tell you, fine, but most of the time, the things that are forbidden are dead animals, not live animals. Rabbi Shmuel has another answer. Since what do you do with this second bird? You send it out to the field, right? The Torah says send it out to the field. Kisadeh. So the Torah is telling you that it's like a field. Masad muteres, afai nami muteres. Just as a field, there's nothing to indicate that the field that you send the bird out over is forbidden. The bird has the same rule. So Gemara says, "Oh, that's not very convincing." Is that what we're going to use the word field for? No, we have another thing that we already learned from that. Like, it has to be over a field. You can't stand on the coast in Yafo and send it out over the sea. That's not a field. Or or stand at Gabos, which apparently is a place that borders the desert, and send it out into the desert. Or you can't stand at the gate of a city and send it into the city. No. What you have to do is you have to send it out free over a field. So we already learned something from this word sadeh. So how can you use the word sadeh for our purposes also? So the answer is, well, how do you answer that? Sadeh, my hasadeh, shmami no tarte, because it says the field. Okay, if the word said send it out over a field, then fine. Then we would only learn one thing from it. But since it's the field, that is enough to give us another hope. Rava has a different answer altogether. Well, Amar Torah shalach l'takala. Rava says it's logical. It's like the Torah is telling you, send this bird away, right? Now, that how are you going to identify that bird afterwards? That is one that is forbidden for use, right? It's just a bird. It can fly anywhere, right? So we're going to assume that the Torah is not going to put this stumbling block in front of people, right? Someone will find that bird later, have no idea that it was used as a mitzvah in the mitzvah ritual, use the bird, and that person will violate this mitzvah completely unknowingly. So therefore, it makes sense that it's the one that you send away that is permitted, not forbidden. It's the other one that is slaughtered that is forbidden.
That create. If that were the case, there would be so many complications. Like, you'd never be able to do this ritual after the first time it was done,
or you'd never be able to use any bird.
At least of the birds that are used in this ritual.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you could get into Rove, right, and so on. I suppose you could find a way, but yeah, it's that's actually, to me, that's a pretty convincing argument.
Yeah, I was wondering if they were going to get to this.
Yeah. Okay. So, all right. So that's it for the birds. Now, the Mishnah also said, what else can't you use for Kiddushin, for marrying someone? Bisar Nazir, the hair of a Nazir. When a Nazir finishes his Nazir period, part of the ritual is to cut off his hair. And how do you know you can't benefit from that hair? Kadoshia Gadel Parasarosha. The Torah says that the Nazir will be kadosh, will be holy, and grow his hair. Gidulo yeh kadosh. So by that juxtaposition, we understand that the hair that he grows is kadosh. So Gemara says, wait a minute, Ima Kodesh Tofis is Dama V'Yotzi L'Chulin. But something that's Hekdesh, right? Something that belongs to the temple can always be redeemed, right? Afsir Nazir Tofis is Dama V'Yotzi L'Chulin. Maybe you could use the hair of a Nazir if you redeem it, right? So Gemara says Mikrin and Kodesh. No, you have to distinguish between the words Kodesh and Kadosh. Kodesh is referring to sacrifices. Kadosh is something else. It means it's holy. So, but not necessarily in a sacrificial sense, or in the sense that you can't use it like hekdesh. So so we can say that that the hair is forbidden, but it's not like hekdesh. It's not like sacrificial things which can be redeemed. This hair, we could now say, can never be redeemed. It is intrinsically holy and can't be redeemed, and therefore it can't be used for kiddushin. Next thing in the Mishnah was Peter Chamor. So a firstborn donkey you're supposed to redeem, but if you don't redeem it, you have to break its neck, right? And that now the Mishnah is claiming that broke that donkey, which you broke its neck because you didn't redeem it, cannot be used and therefore cannot be used for kiddushin. Maybe this says that our Mishnah is not according to Rabbi Shimon, the Tanya, because Rabbi Shimon says in the Brisa, Petra Chamor Sabana. Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says you can't use a Petra Chamor, the firstborn donkey. If Rabbi Shimon Matir, Rabbi Shimon says you can. So if Rabbi Shimon says you can use it, then he probably doesn't agree with our Mishnah that says it's not good for kiddushin. Amar Nachman said, no, we're talking about after the neck is broken. Our Mishnah is talking about after the neck is broken of the donkey, and everybody agrees. So Rabbi Shimon would say, in other words, he's interpreting Rabbi Shimon to say that the prohibition is only before the neck is broken. Once you decide not to redeem it and to break its neck, then even Rabbi Shimon would say no longer eligible. Okay, and next thing was basar b'chalav, milk and meat cooked together. And where do you get the idea that that's asar b'hana? So this is actually an interesting thing that the meat and milk cooked together, you can't even get benefit from, right? You can't, and so there are all kinds of questions about can you sell it, right? Or can you do business with things like that? What is the source to say that basar b'chalav is not permitted for use? The Torah says 3 times, don't cook a goat in its mother's milk. Why does it say it 3 times? In 3 different places in the Torah. One is to prohibit eating, one is to prohibit getting benefit from it, and one is to prohibit even creating it, even cooking it together in the first place. So that is the source for Isur Hana, for meat and milk cooked together. And Masnisin Delo Ki Haitana, and this Mishnah opposes another Mishnah, the Tanya, which is Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda Omer Basar B'chalav Asar B'achila. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda says you can't eat milk and meat. Mutar bana, but you can use it for your benefit. Shenamar Ki Am Kadosh Atal Hashem Elokecha Lo Tfashal Gedi B'chalev Imo. You're a holy nation to God. Don't cook a goat in its mother's milk. L'Halanu Omer, and elsewhere it says Anshe Kodesh Divli, be holy, and continues Basar Basada Trefa Lo Tuchelu. If you find a carcass in the field, in other words, it hasn't been shafted properly, don't eat it. Right? That's not kosher. But in that case, it doesn't say don't use it, right? Like Halav Tashlichun, so it says you can throw it to the dogs. In other words, you can benefit by feeding it to your pets, or whatever, to your dogs. So we're gonna, by the word kadosh being used in both cases, that you're kadosh, just as you can not eat treifa, but you can use it. So too, he says basar b'chalav, meat and milk, you may not eat it, but you can benefit from it. So there is a disagreement in these 2 mishnahs. I'm fairly certain that the way we follow is that you cannot benefit from basar b'chalav, but there is an alternate opinion in the Mishnah, and that opposes our Mishnah, which says you can't benefit from it, therefore you can't use it for Kiddushin. Next up, the chulin shenishchatu bazar. If you have regular meat, so something that's not sacrificial, and you took it to the temple and you slaughtered it there. So that the Mishnah says also asur bana, you can't use that anymore for your benefit. What's the source? There's two domains here. There's the temple and outside the temple. Just as in the temple, my God says my things, my meat, the meat that is sacrificial, that's the place for it, and not outside the temple. Similarly, regular meat, your meat, slaughter in your place, not in my place. So it's kind of a logical derivation um, based on the existence of this exclusive domain of the temple, that we understand that the temple is not for regular meat, and if you do slaughter regular meat there, it is asur bana, just as sacrificial meat slaughtered outside the temple is asur bana. Just as one is forbidden, so is the other. So Gemara says, well, wait a minute, right? But it's not the same, because maybe there should be a punishment of kares, because if you take sacrificial meat and slaughter it outside the temple, not only is it forbidden, but you get a punishment of kares. Maybe that should be applied also to regular meat in the temple. Across, the Torah says no. Specifically, the Torah says, when do you get kares? When you take sacrificial meat and slaughter it outside. Al korban anish kares, al chulin shenishchatu and anish kares. It says specifically, only in this case, only in the case of sacrificial meat outside the temple do you get kares. I'm not going to apply kares to regular meat inside the temple. Ikol mifrach, the Gemara says, well, you could refute that argument. So you can refute the whole thing. Like, well, if I see that the Torah says different rule, like there's a rule that kares applies only to sacrificial meat outside the temple. So maybe the whole rule in the first place applies only to sacrificial meat outside the temple and not at all to regular meat inside the temple. So by answers, here's another source. So when the Torah describes a zevach shlamim in the beginning of Vayikra, it has three options. There's cattle, sheep, and goat, and there's a separate paragraph for each. And each time it says this is how you prepare it, and this is how you slaughter it. Each time it says you slaughter it. Plus a kray yisera. Obviously, you slaughter it. Why don't you just say, there may be certain differences, but all of them get slaughtered. So why don't you just sum up and say all of these three things you slaughter them? So why does it say three times in each case? Why does it tell you that you slaughter it? Now, since it says when when you are slaughtering your own meat and you're far from the temple, that only applies to so this is actually talking about korbanos, but in the before entering the land of Israel, in the desert, in other words, people were told that they could do these zevach shlamim sacrifices if they were far away from the temple, from the Ohel Moed. In that case, then they could do it wherever they were. So it's only when you're far away. So that tells you that that regular meat cannot be slaughtered in the temple. Maybe that would only be an animal that is eligible by virtue of being tamim, right, of being unblemished, maybe an animal that's blemished, which is anyway ineligible for a sacrifice. Maybe you'd be um, uh, permitted. Maybe they're also. How do you know to forbid those as well? Marbanis baliamumin shekain min hamachshir. I'll tell you why. Because I include those because they're the same species of the animal that you can bring as a sacrifice. How do I know to include even a wild animal, like not wild, but a non-domesticated animal, like for example a deer? How do I know to include that? Because even a deer requires shchita, just like an animal. So therefore, because shchita applies to it, therefore don't do it in the temple if it's for your own use. What about birds? So I have no other way to tell me this about birds because they don't require the same type of shchita. So therefore because in the temple the way that you sacrificed a bird was not shchita with a knife across the throat. It was severing the head with the fingernail, if I remember correctly. So how do I know to include birds? That I get from the fact that it says three times referring to shchita. So now yachal lo yishchot. So maybe the rule is sure, don't slaughter them in the temple courtyard. But if you did, all right, so you could still eat it, like you transgressed. But how do I know that the meat is no longer you can't benefit from it? When it's that you've done it, when you've slaughtered it because you're far away, then you can eat it. When something is out of the ordinary, when you make an exception, right? Because you're far away, that's when you can eat it. But that implies that any other exception or any other unusual circumstance, like the case where you slaughter your own animal in the temple, that is not permitted to be eaten. That's what I'm excluding. Now, I only know that about unblemished animals, because you can sacrifice them. What about blemished animals? And I'll include balimumin, blemished animals, because they're still the same species of animals, so they're included. How do I know to include undomesticated animals? Because they also need shchita. Anything that needs shchita, that I'm going to include in this rule. What about birds? From the fact that it says three times again. So now, one second. Where are we up to now? So we know that you can't eat the meat, right? Of chulin shenishchatu bazar. How do you know you can't benefit from it? I mean, that's what we're trying to get to, right? Is the benefit thing. So I might think that you have to that you're not supposed to do it, but if you did do it, you can still feed it to your dog. Talmud Lomar, so no, the Torah says about treifa meat, right? Meat that is not slaughtered properly. That's what you can give to the dogs. It says specifically, what am I excluding by saying no? This is what you can feed to the dogs. You know what you can't feed to the dogs? This what our Mishnah discussed in the first place, which is regular meat that you slaughter in the temple. You can't even feed that to the dogs. It is not only asur b'achila, not only can you not eat it, you cannot benefit from it, and therefore you cannot marry anybody with it. And we will pause here for today and pick it up again tomorrow.
Yasher Koach, Dov.
Have a good day, everybody. Hope
Good to have you back.
Have a good day. Welcome
Thank
back.
you. Thank you.